it occurs to me, and perhaps I may have had some feedback on this, that I've spent quite a bit of time ranting about my issues. Uh, so I think it's time maybe to probe that big noggin of yours. And I'm pretty sure I know you've got some concerns and topics of discussion that likely would affect both of us, and for that matter, all Canadians.
Oh, you mean the ones that you've constantly shot down over the last 3 episodes?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
You want me to get to one of those finally?
I think I finally come around to what good ideas they were.
Okay. Well,
My
good.
initial aversion to them wasn't reflective of the quality of the idea. Rather, the idea wasn't mine.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense too.
So, yeah, I was immediately resistant.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. Well, actually, that segues quite well into the thing, into the topic. Well, it's actually it's a thing that's probably that you have as much, if not more, knowledge as I do, being the news director at CKY, the CTV affiliate in Winnipeg. The budget came out, CBC's budget. Mr. Trudeau decided.
The federal budget and subsequent, yeah, the CBC budget, yes.
Right. So he decided to give us and Canadians in general $50 billion of our money. And he decided to give CBC an extra $42 million when I think it was just a couple of months ago, the head of CBC radio, I can't remember her name, a woman, they grilled her in the House of Commons, I think, to find out why she needed so much money, and I think they pointed to her huge salary, her huge bloated salary, and I think the word bloated might come up a lot in the next half hour. By the way,
Good.
So yeah, I've worked. You worked against, if that's the right word.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, yeah. Private television does compete against CBC, and to clarify, the woman you're speaking of is Catherine Tate, and she actually is the CEO for both. And maybe we should clarify this for Canadians. There is the CBC, and then there is Radio Canada, the French CBC. So we tend to think of them as one entity, but that would be part of the problem why it's so expensive, because everything you do at CBC, then you do it again in French at Radio Canada. And she is the CEO of both.
Right.
And man, they couldn't have hired a less likable person.
Yeah, just entitled. It just at least comes across entitled.
At a House of Commons committee, CBC President Catherine Tate was asked repeatedly why the Crown Corporation is cutting 800 jobs, but still planning to pay bonuses to executives, including to Tate herself.
The witness doesn't want to answer my question. It's very simple. Will she be given a bonus in 2020?
It's not my decision whether I get a bonus or not.
Would you consider asking the board of directors to reconsider the bonus structure at CBC?
I certainly will consider all scenarios. However, we have a program in place. First of all, these are not frivolous awards given at Christmas time. This is performance pay. And for an individual, let's say, who's making $80,000, a portion of that pay is held back. That's what performance pay is.
Yeah, she doesn't explain herself well. And so you were saying, that she went before these MPs, and I don't know if you're aware that in those hearings, they asked her, well, you guys have projected for this budget that's coming up now, they projected what they called $125 million in financial pressures.
Yes.
That's the term they used. Financial. Okay, that's a shortfall or the threat of one.
They just can't talk. They just and this goes to exactly what I want to talk about how there seems to be a level of, and I'm gonna make up a phrase, out of touchness with CBC.
Yes.
And so let me start by saying about 10 years ago, I worked locally here in Winnipeg. There's an afternoon show called Up to Speed. I think it's on 3 hours an afternoon. I'm sure every local station has their own version of it. And I was what they call a columnist. So I would do a 2-minute bit every, I think it was Wednesday on, they gave me quite the long leash. I could kind of do it on whatever I wanted, and I could record it.
Wow, that seems risky.
I mean, I had to run it by the authorities. So whether it was, I remember one time it was potholes in spring. It was, I believe it was car, auto thefts had gone up quite high. Auto and bike thefts had gone up quite high. Anyway, so, and I actually would have clips of them, except my 20-year-old son a few years ago decided to go to my computer and delete every single file I've ever had on my computer. So not only his OCD kicked in, so not only will you not ever hear any of those, you will not hear any of the brilliant songs that I had come up with at 4 or 5 in the morning and snuck down to and recorded when they were still fresh in my mind. You won't hear any of those either. Now, that latter is probably for the better, because I don't think any of those songs would have been good. You know, when it's 4 in the morning, you have a great idea. Well, I don't have to tell you about having a great idea and then it turning out to not be a great idea.
I am kind of the poster child for that.
Exactly. So anyway,
thanks for ripping that scab off again.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, about 10 years ago ish or so, maybe it was a little more, I did a thing. And so I went in there, and I came from not only a private radio, but I came in from my partner James and I doing Two Sports Guys, where we just kind of had we had no budget. You know, we went to the keg and got, I think, $750 for the year so that we could plaster their logo all over our show, and that maybe afforded us a field camera once a month. But anyway, so I went in there, and I want to preface this by saying all the people, I think to a person that I met at CBC, were lovely people.
Great people. That's why it pains me to rip the CBC, because they're like Maritimers. I've never met a CBC person I didn't like.
Isn't that the truth? So they're very lovely people, but they get, I call it learned helplessness. You get to a point where, for instance, let me back up. So when I was in Toronto, I did a 3-hour show. Me and my producer, a guy named Johnny B, there was 2 of us that did a 3-hour show every morning. We got it. It was 9 to noon, I think, was our show. And we'd get there at 7 in the morning and we'd start making phone calls. And we edited our own audio for clips, for promos. We did the 2 of us did everything. And CBC would have 6 or 7 or 8 people for that particular kind of show. And when I went into this up to speed thing, we'd have a team meeting ahead of the show. There were 7, 8 people in it. There was an assignment person. There was an audio editor. It went on and on and on. And the meetings, more often than not, I just left. I said, I got to get coffee. And I never went back because my eyes had glazed over, much like the donuts they served every morning. and it just got to a point, like, can someone just do it? I remember the first time I recorded something and I wanted to edit it. I went into the editing suite and the guy goes, no, you're not editing this. That's that guy's job. And I go, yeah, but he's busy and I'd like to get it done. I was like, no, that's, and I know it's union, but you know, you could have a little bit of leeway. It just got, I looked around and realized they could do this same show with 1/3 of the people. And as much as I was really trying to weasel myself into a job at CBC, okay, so let's be clear, I wanted to get on that gravy train. I was just, I realized, my wife even said, you'd hate it there. And she's right, because it would just be like, you just couldn't get anything done ever. You'd have to run everything through every kind of official channel, and it would have driven me crazy. And
well, you would have started every day with some higher up saying, Rick, could I see you in my office for a moment?
That even happened in private radio far too often.
Oh,
so,
yes.
yeah. So public radio, and then you'd go there, and then you just got to know someone where they left. They took a year leave to write a book or whatever. And then Joe was, we were covering, it was right when we were covering the flood. There was a kind of I don't think it was was it the flood of the century in 2007? I don't know when it was.
No, that was 97 was the flood of the century, but that was that century.
Right, okay. So I think this
might have been a bit bold to declare 07 the flood of this century with 93 years to go. That's confident.
Well, it's also bold to say that Taylor Swift has the best album of the 21st century when it's only 2024, but yet here we are.
Yes.
So, sorry, double album. I digress.
Oh,
yeah, she snuck that in.
I'm not as up on Taylor as you are.
No bracelets for you?
Now that she's dating Travis Kelce, I've had to remove her from my celebrity exemption list. We're not
Oh,
really speaking right now.
yeah, well, I'm sure she'd agree
I've
with
gone back to Camila Cabello.
it. You see the look on my face, like I'm sorry, I got nothing. What was I saying? They go on leave. Oh, someone had come back from. They were in Grand Forks. There was a radio crew, a TV crew, which amazed me because it's like, if you're doing a TV hit, if I'm on TV going, here I am at Grand Forks, the Red River is cresting. It looks like it's cresting at 27 feet. It should be in Winnipeg in a day and a half. Seems to me you could take that audio and just put that on the radio. And now you've got one person doing both jobs. If you have to give that person an extra meal or an extra $10, okay. But to send a TV and a radio crew down to do exactly the same thing already seemed way too much for me, let alone there was 3 or 4 people on each of those crews, because you got to have a sound person for radio. You can't trust a talking person like you or me in this case, to actually know what sound sounds like, right? And then one guy came back and we were in a meeting and he came back and he said, we got new Klieg lights, and you'll know Klieg lights are these studio lights. And he said, my eyes hurt. And some guy, like his immediate superior, just looked right at him without batting. You need to take 2 weeks off and get those eyes looked at. And I'm just sitting there laughing, go, what? Like he just said the lights were bright. He didn't say that his were burned. He didn't say it hurt. He just said, boy, those lights are bright. And immediately take 2 weeks off and get that looked at. So
Not just, why don't you get out of here then?
Yeah, stop looking at the sun, right? Stop being like Theo Fleury looking at a 4-minute eclipse for an hour and a half. So,
well, I stared at it for about, I don't know, an hour and a half. And guess what? I feel amazing today.
So anyway, and I could go on and on. I know you have, because you were news director at CKY and you were directly competing for viewers with CBC. And I know, and at CreekCom, you sent people over there to article or whatever the term is to learn the craft.
Internships, that sort of thing, sure.
And you would lose people from and we know some of them, from the Mike Beauregards to the whoever they are.
Janet Stewart, John Sauter,
yeah. They would offer
Cameron McIntosh.
They would offer them more money to do less work, and you couldn't compete with that at all.
No, we could not. I'd like to drill. I like this phrase you just used, learned helplessness. So I want to give you 3 examples, and then you tell me if these are examples of learned helplessness.
Sure.
So these are examples of CBC largesse, CBC extravagance.
Now that's a fancy way of saying bloating, but you go ahead with your
because it twigged with me when you said could do this with about 1/3 of the people. Back in the 90s, TSN used to cover the Brier and the Scotties during the week. And then CBC would come in on the weekend and do the semifinals and finals.
Don Whitman. Oh, it was great.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, TSN would cover a week. So usually, I guess, 7 days, Saturday to Friday, with exactly 1/3 of the crew CBC used for the weekend.
Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite stories of CBC extravagance. I have a good friend. I can't say who he is because this could get, anyway, he's a big wheel production designer now, but he got his start in TV as a set dresser for Kids in the Hall. And a set dresser is essentially a glorified mover. You move furniture onto the set, you take furniture off the set. So he was working in Toronto, where CBC had built their headquarters in downtown Toronto on some of the most expensive commercial real estate in the country.
Right on Front Street, exactly.
And to save money, they didn't put any storage in place, or very limited storage. So they'd oftentimes, we need couch and lamp from a certain period or something specific. So they'd make a cursory effort to rent it or find it somewhere, cursory effort. But if that couldn't be done quickly, they'd buy it, use it, and throw it away. And my friend furnished an entire house out of furniture that he went back at the end of the day it had been thrown away. It was garbage because they'd used it once, throw it away.
He furnished his own house, you're saying, with that.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, even better. Yeah.
Yeah. Reuse, recycle, So here's the third example. And this comment was said by a guy we both know, a very well-respected CBC sports journalist. And in conversation, he said, yeah, like they're talking about getting rid of our librarian. CBC has a librarian that keeps track of their video person. You don't go and look for stuff yourself. Anyway,
you got to get a requisite form, hand it to that person.
I guess so. And I do know this, back in the early 90s, the librarian was paid 48 grand a year, which in 1993 was a fair chunk of dough. Anyway, there was talk of getting rid of the librarian. And this journalist said, like, how are we supposed to do our jobs without a librarian?
Right.
Is that what you mean by learned, what was your phrase, learned helplessness?
Yeah, I think those are all. I don't know about the furniture one, but it just you're taught, and here's where I get it from. I have to be very careful because I want to be very just kind of analytical when I say this. A good acquaintance of mine works with the First Nations, and he will go to meetings. And my friend is a white guy like me, very white, and he'll go to meetings with chief and council, and they won't start the meeting until he gets there. If he's a snowstorm and he gets there 20 minutes late, he'll go, what did I miss? And they'll go, we haven't started yet. And he says they've learned over the last, since we colonized them, they've learned that they don't start until the white person starts the meeting. So it's a learned helplessness, right? It's not necessarily their fault. It's just the way they've always done things because it's been passed down. So, but learned helplessness is just over time. You've learned. My kids are a little bit like that. As you know, I have a couple of kids with fetal alcohol, and my wife and I have decided that to make sure our own mental health stays put. Sometimes we do too much stuff for them, right? Like this morning, I made pancakes. Every Sunday morning, I make pancakes. Well, they're 20 and 24. They can probably make their own pancakes, but I make it because it's just easier. Because by the time they're done, the kitchen's a mess, and it's just easier. So they've learned now that they don't have to make pancakes to get pancakes. So I've taught them learned helplessness. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And I think at CBC, when a Mike Beauregard, and I'm not picking on him, or a John Sauter, who just recently retired, by the way, or whomever it is, goes there, they go, wow, I'm getting paid more and I'm doing less. And I think most of us would go, that's great. You got me. Even if they said you have to do a little more, but we'll pay you substantially more, most people go, I'm going to take that job. Here, they're going to pay you more. And oh, by the way, you do less. And so I think you learn. I think you had a good example about when you were placing some of your CRECOM, your creative communications students, about how if they got jobs at CBC and then they got clothes and a house commensurate with their salary, they can't go back.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And the irony to that is, like for people that are unaware, the difference in salaries in private television, let's say for a reporter and a reporter at CBC, a CBC reporter would make almost twice as much in many cases as a reporter. And the irony of that is as well, let's use Winnipeg as an example. If you're CBC getting paid twice as much, you're at the number 3 station getting paid twice as much as a reporter at the number 1 station. Absolutely. What are you getting paid for? Are you that much better? If you were, you wouldn't be number 3. So,
right.
So, and yeah, that was a thing for young people. They go to CBC and think, well, this is how it is. Well, no, this is how it is at CBC. That's not the real world. And I would often get told by CBC people that we were lucky that they got paid the way they did, because that kept salaries up. As they'd say, if it weren't for us, private TV would pay you even less. And there might be some truth to that.
But here's the other side of that is you as the person hiring people, you're you're training these people, you're paying them to teach them. And once they get quote unquote good or comfortable in their positions, off they go, and now you got to start from scratch again, right?
Yes, Janet Stewart. It cost us, by my memory, gosh, nearly, I'm going to want to say around 20 grand to move her and her husband from Nova Scotia, because her husband's a fascinating guy. And among his many talents is he refurbishes vintage jukeboxes and pinball machines.
I think there was a story about him a couple of years ago in the Free Press. Big David Sanderson piece exactly on that.
Yeah. He's a great guy and a really, really interesting guy. So we paid to move like 9 jukeboxes and 3 pinball machines from Halifax to Winnipeg. And those bastards at CBC never contributed a nickel to that when they stole Janet away.
Right.
And how that connects to the salary thing is we paid our people as much as we could.
Yeah.
There'll be CTV people right now going, but it was tied to revenue. If we could have paid more, we would have. But at some point, we hit the top and we said, well, there is no point in paying much more than this because we can't compete with CBC anyway. Like, what's the point in bumping up Marilee Caruso's salary another 20%? She's still going to be about 30% behind what she'd get at CBC. So what's the solution? Where should we go next with this? If they put you in charge, you got Catherine Tate's job. What now?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, the first thing I do is probably take a couple of months off, and then I would hit the ground running.
Sure.
But no, we talked about this before. We came on and started our podcast about whether to get rid of CBC. I think CBC, just like NPR in the States, I think it has a place. I think it's the only station that can afford, with our money, to do stories from Flin Flon and Estevan and Weyburn. Yeah,
obviously an underserved community.
I did Weyburn and Estevan together. Prince George, whatever, Truro, Nova Scotia. So private TV radio can't do that. They can't, but they can. So I like that. But there's just an overkill. There's just too many people doing a job for way less people. All I'm saying is that absolutely have the CBC. And I know if they all of a sudden cut the salary in half, or if I was in charge, people would be fired. I get that. But you know what? It's taxpayer. It's our money. To say that now that what did you say the budget was? 1.2 billion or something this year?
This year. Anyway, it's 1.38 billion this year.
So do I say you cut it in half the first year? Of course not. But you could whittle away that in 10 years, you could probably get down to 60% of the staff. I mean, you're talking about attrition, you're talking about retirement, and then not replacing. I mean, like I said, there's like I would go in and do my piece. It was a 2-minute. And by the way, I should just mention that at some point, at 3 or 4 weeks in, I convinced them to let me do it from home, because I have a kind of a studio quality microphone and a Mac, so I could do them from home. And I did them, and I literally emailed them in. They aired, and they sent me money. It didn't last for long. I think they were going, no, he has to come in. And I go, why? I don't really talk. I mean, we have these big planning meetings that I left to get coffee, because I wasn't really the guy on the street going to do interviews. I was just the floater in there. So they did allow me to do that, which I was surprised. I'll give you one other quick story though, before a friend of mine and I, about 10, 15 years ago, had an idea for a car show. By the way, before Seinfeld had his. I just want you to.
Okay.
We were just
riding around in cars getting coffee, I think is his, right?
Yeah, comedians in cars getting coffee, right?
Yes.
So we were going to just drive around and everything had to take place in the car. And so the first time we went, we had a sound engineer in the back with a boom mic, and I was driving, and my friend was in the passenger seat. And we were a little bit stilted because this guy was in the back, and we were under pressure to get stuff. So we didn't really get anything good the first day. The next day I said, can I just take I have a nice high quality digital mini disc tape recorder with a really expensive microphone. He goes, yeah. And so we drove around the whole day. I could give you the whole details. The point of the story is we did about 2 hours of audio. We even got a guy a job interview in a car. I thought it was great. I edited it down to 28 minutes. I sent it in, and I didn't hear back. When I finally contacted the guy in charge, he had left for a year leave to write a book. The replacement woman said, I don't know who you are, what you're talking about. So I resent her the thing, and she says, no, we're not interested in all in that kind of show. So it's, you know, however much, and they paid us, by the way. I think we each got $400. So, okay, that was $800 in a $1.3 billion budget, doesn't mean anything. But that's this kind of stuff that someone greenlit that the next person wasn't, you know, like it's just wasteful. Like it's just, anyone could, you know how the KPMG walks into a government office every once in a while and tells the government how they could save money?
Yes.
A friend of mine did that for years. He said he and his 3-man team would walk in, and within 10 minutes, they could literally tell who shouldn't be working there anymore and who was working hard. And yet they had to take 6 months and make like a shit ton of government money to hand out a 120-page report that said exactly what they do in the first 10 minutes. Like you can get a feel, right, for who's not doing the work and who's really wants to work. And so walk into it. So anyway, yeah, just slowly whittle it down. The listener would have, and I'm talking about radio specifically, the listener would have no idea that the budgets were being chopped. So I would just slowly whittle it down and say, sorry, you're not contributing. You're contributing, but you two guys do one job. So you can thumb wrestle for it or whatever you want, or you each get half the salary and get half time, right? And then never mind the benefits, right? Every time you take a full-time person on, they get full benefits. And so, yeah, it's just the extravagance is completely uncalled for. And I don't think it's reflected on the airwaves. So
I think the majority of Canadians would agree with you. What do you think about, and there are many different ideas as to how to reshape our national broadcast presence. Let's not even call it CBC. Do we need a national broadcaster? You and I are in agreement that we do need something to maintain and develop Canadian culture. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, his idea is defund the CBC, but leave Radio Canada intact. So two-part question. How do you feel about that? And how do you think Canadians would feel about, yeah, we're not doing anything for you English language people anymore, but we've kept the gravy train going for the French speakers. How do you feel about that? And how do you think the country would feel about that?
Now, first of all, because now you've crossed the Pierre Poilievre line.
And I wasn't trying to be provocative.
I know. What does your timer say for time? Because we really could get off on a whole thing. But I do have an answer for you. Okay.
Yeah, we don't actually have that much time left, but I think we all want to hear this. And I think we're going to have to come back with CBC talk next week, because before I get to your answer, there are many factors that we haven't considered here. We haven't talked about Catherine Tate refusing to say if they'd pay bonuses to executives, even though they were going to lay off 800 people. We haven't talked about the cost to taxpayers. According to CBC math, it costs each Canadian $33 a year. Right. But so there's lots and we also haven't talked about how they might create other revenue streams. But so there's a number of things. But anyway, so let's drill down whether you want to focus on it coming from Poilievre or the idea itself.
Well, I mean, let's just quickly with Poilievre. I mean, it's no different than Trudeau, giving the carbon tax break to the Maritimers, because they predominantly heat their homes with heating oil, and not the rest of the country, in which Poilievre his mind exploded over that, which I don't blame him. Doesn't seem fair. But so what he's doing with Radio Canada, Radio Canada versus CBC Radio is no different. He needs the votes. Everyone knows he needs the votes in Quebec. So that's just a political move. I think if he, and he probably looks like he will be the new prime minister, I don't think he's going to cut CBC funding. I just don't. I don't think it's tenable. I think there's going to be too much. Just the unions in general, right? Are all going to. I guess the unions would be against him anyway. But you know what I mean. So that was one part of your question. Did you have two parts of your question, or what would I do?
Well, we know your feeling. How do you think let's imagine Poilievre stuck to that? Would Canadians across the country support that? Or would this be one of those ones, even the people who don't give a shit about the CBC all of a sudden they do give a shit that those French people are getting a CBC, but we don't. I was just about to start watching the Beachcombers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, I think you've answered your own question. I think that's exactly what would happen. I think there's lots of people that. Oh boy, that's my timer. There's a lot of people.
Your boiled eggs appear to be ready.
That's right. I think yes. Yes, I agree with you. People that didn't like the CBC but don't like Polyev would be in an uproar and say, "I can't believe you're doing that." Or more importantly, or more specifically, people that don't like Quebec or think Quebec is this distinct society, which it is. Well, how come they're getting all the money? I mean, I don't. That can't work. It's you might as well get Danielle Smith seceding in Alberta. Yeah, that's going to work. It's come on. None of this is all just cry wolf, get the votes, get in power, and then realize there's really nothing I can do. Sorry, folks, which every government does. I'm not pinholing that on Pierre Poilievre, but certainly there is. And again, I had so many different specific incidences of my dealing with CBC of just the wasteful spend. They just need to. And I wanted to get this in. There is a rumor that our friend Scott Oak, that back in the day, his hair plugs were paid for by CBC. And we both joked that they didn't do a very good job.
Yeah, I don't believe that for that, because CBC would have got top of the line hair plugs. And as much respect as I have for Scott Oak, in my opinion, he is the preeminent sports journalist in Canada. Absolutely. But geez, Scott, why did you even try? Just do the Bruce Willis, you just shave your head, let her buck. You're not fooling anyone.
We can't help Gene Principe with that beautiful flow.
Yes, man, Gene. That is a shingle Gene's got going. So what do you think about this? Because I would like to hear your thoughts. So many people talk about the cutbacks to make CBC next week. How could the CBC be more self-sufficient? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't know if I do yet, but just to be clear, radio doesn't have any commercials, but TV has commercials.
Yes.
Radio is completely, they don't have any revenue at all.
No, which is, and maybe they should, because it is great quality radio. People wouldn't stop listening to CBC radio if they had ads like they do everywhere else in the world.
And two things to that. One, they always have, and we used to mock this on my show in Toronto. If the host doesn't have anything to say or is trying to get papers together for 30 seconds, they just play a harp or a guitar for 30 seconds, right? And you're in and you're in the radio going, why are they just playing? What is this transition thing? He said, well, I've been in radio. They're just trying to figure out, they're on the thing going, who's next? Why does the phone doesn't work, right? So you listen to 30 seconds of harp anyway. You might as well just play a commercial. Also, I have the cheapest Netflix, and I just noticed last week or a week ago that they started putting in commercials. I guess I haven't watched it in a long time because my kid said, oh, that's been going on for a long time. So I'm like 30 minutes into a movie and there's 2 commercials. I don't care. Like, it didn't bother me. I had time to, I know I could pause, but I'm old school. I had time to go get a sandwich or whatever. And so, they could put I think 100% they could put some, or product placements, like brought to you by the Home Depot studio, right?
Like they used to have the craft recipe commercials on TV. Remember those ones? Where every recipe included Philadelphia cream cheese.
Yeah.
When one good thing like whipped cream cheese comes in so many appetizing flavors, you can make a snack tray full of infinite varieties. Spread rye rounds and toasted bread rounds with smooth, creamy flavors like onion, roquefort, or pimento. These appetizers are so light and fluffy, they're reminiscent of snowflakes. Whipped cream cheese for a full variety of appetizers from Kraft.
But because everything's virtual, I think, like even the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, by the way, my Blue Bomber cap, although this is a friend of mine's daughter made this is the Ukrainian colors, but most people mistake it for Blue Bombers, so that's fine. It's kind of a 2-in-1. But the Blue Bombers, they broadcast live from the Czechcom studio, high above the whatever the field's called,
IG Field.
Right. And so that's brilliant because you're just listening on radio. They always don't have any signage because it's radio. They just have to say that it's that studio, and then it's that studio. So radio being what it is, you can make a shit ton of money without signage, without getting in there, with like product placement, that's slipping it in, right? So yeah, there's lots of ideas, but certainly if we're going to be bitching about it, maybe we should come up with some ideas. So people don't go, oh, they're just complaining. They don't have any smart ideas of their own. Well, maybe we do.
Come to me with solutions, not problems. All right, this ought to be good, coming to you with solutions, not problems, regarding funding of our national broadcaster.